Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 336, recorded on Monday, February 10th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all of your favorite podcasting platforms, with a video version available on YouTube. If you're watching this or listening to this, consider subscribing wherever that happens to be. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is Comic Sans Pixel Riffs. Hello, sir.
Hello. I was hoping to at least be Helvetica, but you know that's just my energy today. Apparently, we've been talking about comics. I am Sans Comics right now, I suppose, but we've been talking a little bit about comic movie adaptations, the Fantastic Four trailer, a bunch of other stuff we're excited for, and potentially a little bit skeptical of coming out right now. I'm also watching Severance and loving that, so a little bit of spoiler-free talk happened in the pre-show in the render distance, which is the extended version of the podcast that everybody can get if they sign up on Patreon and choose to support the show. You can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, with a slight asterisk here that some changes are coming to Patreon this week with regards to our billing. We've been talking about the move from per podcast billing to subscription billing for a little while now, so hopefully this should be the last time you have to hear about it from us, but stay tuned on the Patreon page if you're thinking of signing up to support us, because there may be some changes coming in this week. In the meantime, our patrons can listen to the latest monthly Minecraft Hangout that we had to discuss what everyone else has been up to in Minecraft the last month. It was actually covering a 2-month period over December and January. So that's up on the feed now as of last week. And we have a quarterly hangout coming up. Should hopefully be recorded the end of this week. Schedule's pending because we both have a little bit of stuff going on the weekends lately. But once again, patrons can stay tuned to the announcements channel in our Discord to hear about when these extra bonus recordings happen. And the quarterly is where we go behind the scenes, tell everybody what the podcast has been doing download numbers wise and how it's been performing on YouTube. So if you're interested in the inside baseball of it all, at patreon.com/thespawnchunks is the place to go to sign up and support the show.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, man?
This week has been a landscaping week for me, actually. I've been working on turning the spawn area, or my starter base area, into something like a river valley with rivers running off of this big mountain that I started around. And I've been working on the beginnings of that, really, the sources of a lot of the river activity, which always begins as sort of a mountain spring and maybe a pool or a lake or something like that that fills up, and then the water comes spilling over that, and that's where you get the opportunity to build sort of waterfalls and more dramatic water features. So right now, I just have a series of water sources further up on the mountain, naturally generated, that come down the sides of the mountain in the usual sort of widened out waterfalls where the water has been able to split and travel over multiple blocks and kind of do that staircasing thing that water does. I wanted to shape that a little bit more and make it feel more natural. So with the natural base of the mountain having this kind of divot in it, I thought, let's build up the sides of that so it feels like it's supported, turn that into a kind of basin that the water is pooling in, and then the water from that comes rushing down into the area that I'm going to be reshaping into the river. So I'm sort of building this river from the top down, I guess. But it's given me the opportunity to work with a bit more landscaping, inspired by some just natural world stuff. I don't have any specific reference images I'm working from, but just from having been to a couple of, national parks, both here in the UK and in the States, there are some really dramatic water features, like dramatic waterfalls and rivers and stuff. And I think about the structure of those rivers and how we can simulate stuff like that in Minecraft. And it always comes down to rivers not just being a linear thing. There's always downward momentum, like they're following gravity, they're inevitably flowing towards the sea, which Minecraft rivers don't do through natural generation. Any river biomes that you find are always flat and at sea level, perhaps because of the way water shapes itself as a fluid in this game. But I decided to try and change the verticality of things by actually having it start off, flow down into a point, pool there, and then flow down to the next point, and create this system that I've seen in other like natural rivers where there are sort of dips and areas where the water has eroded a different channel and then has maybe changed course over the millennia of it shaping the landscape around it. So it's difficult to think like water in Minecraft, but I think I'm getting there. I think I finally sort of understand what I want to do with this. And I've been having fun decorating the area around the outside, showing patches where grass and dirt have eroded and given way to stone, or where there wouldn't be any stone naturally because of how sheer the cliff face is. And so I'm working on a few techniques to replace bits and pieces of the hillside with the rocky and watery landscape that I really want from this place.
It's looking great, man. I really see what you mentioned, refreshing everyone's memory last week with the water going through the cherry grove biome and changing color. So
Yes.
It's got a lighter blue at the top, and then it becomes darker blue as it goes down to hitting the pool and the rocky surfaces that you just described. And it's really effective in making it look like a unique feature. And like, I mean, the first question I imagine that people ask if they haven't been privy to is like, how did you do that? Like, how did, how did you get the water to change color like that? And he's like, this is just, I chose this area. And there's something to be said, I think, for, we'll say, setting yourself up for success in terms of choosing the right biome or choosing the right natural feature, or just leaning into a natural feature that you find in an area where your brain just kind of goes, oh, wow, that's really cool, as just a natural Minecraft thing. And then setting yourself up to like, well, now I can go in here and really use my skills and my knowledge and mission, I guess, around this area to highlight the natural feature, but then kind of like make it your own and make it serve a purpose that you've designated. And yeah, I like the idea of the rocky pool. And it reminds me of like when I hike a lot, and I follow some people online, and I'll see photographs of waterfalls from around the world, and they absolutely have like these pools at the bottom, then they continue on. And I love the look of waterfalls that are coming down a jagged surface that are then split. So you have a really big waterfall, and then it forks once or twice or three times, and then it all kind of comes down at the bottom. And that kind of stuff just looks really, really cool. And I think the only thing that where I guess you could sort of bring it in Minecraft in some ways, but the sound of a waterfall, I think, is the one thing that's missing in Minecraft.
Yeah.
Like to have that roaring kind of like water displacement happening as it rolls over rocks and stuff like that. Do you have any plans to add any we'll say like fake steam or water vapor splashing up from the bottom? Like I've seen people do it with like campfires, or what's the other thing they use? Cobwebs, to kind of make it look like there's a lot of white splashing going on.
Yeah, I might do stuff like that. I get a few questions on Twitch about that while I was designing this on stream over the week, and I think really it's going to come down to how I feel once I've got more of this done. I think that's sort of a final detail pass that I'll apply once I've done a lot more with this, because right now, even though they're relatively tall waterfalls in Minecraft terms, I don't know if realistically this being like a few meters high in actuality feels like it's going to have that level of velocity and churn, and it's not going to be like Niagara, you know? It's going to be a lot more kind of relatively contained. Right now, the thing about it is it's flowing down the hillside really more than it is like coming over a lip and then cascading downwards and free falling. So I don't know if I want it to have that level of like velocity. And in the areas where it is free falling, it's vertical for maybe 4 or 5 blocks, and then it hits water. And at the scale I have it right now, I don't know if that kind of detail is just going to be really obviously, oh, that's clearly a cobweb. I want it to be, because a lot of this is just going to be background detail and stuff that's visible from a distance, I don't want it to look too obvious what those details are, and if they are such distinctive shapes like cobwebs and stuff, then I'm not certain yet. It's a technique I will happily employ elsewhere if it feels like there's a more dramatic place to do it, but I'm also working with natural terrain to begin with. I'm not re-sculpting a lot of this or designing any of it from scratch more than I am just modifying what I've already got. And so I've seen people build waterfalls where they will build a giant tall cliff and they'll have the water coming down from that maybe like 70 blocks or something like that, which it probably does travel that distance on this mountain, but it's all kind of staircasing down the hillside instead of just dropping from the front. If anything, with waterfalls like that, if you're trying to create artificial effects, I might even go the whole hog and make the entire waterfall itself from artificial materials. Think about incorporating different like stained glass and things like that. But in this case, because like you said, the effect of the sort of sunlight on the water that's simulated by it going through the cherry biome and changing color, I sort of wanted to keep this natural water in the process of doing that. So yeah, it's still early days, of course, but I'm really happy with the level of detail that I've got in there so far, using some of the techniques you and I have talked about in recent weeks, like being able to use pale moss as a stone substitute, but being able to plant anything organic on it. So there are ferns and grass and occasional like small drip leaf and stuff popping up from what feels like a normal kind of stone outcropping in the middle of this waterfall, and adding green space back into areas where otherwise it would be stone that had kind of been washed clean, or nothing would really be able to grow successfully there because of its proximity to the waterfall. I managed to sneak in a couple of details that make it still feel kind of organic and add a bit more than just grey and blue to the color palette. I've also found pale moss really good for shading. There's a couple of boulders that I've included screenshots of here, which are just regular natural stone with andesite on one side for a highlight and pale moss on the other side for a shadow. And it's just three separate blocks, which, when viewed from a distance, really create this sense of three-dimensionality to even a flat surface, because there's shadow on one side and highlight on the other side. Really rudimentary technique. I'm very early on in my exploration of how I can incorporate shading techniques like this, the kind of stuff that you see builders like BOO and Fwip do like spectacularly well. But yeah, I'm in the early days of experimenting with that, and I think on a larger scale I'd be able to do more. But for small scale stuff, just sticking to 3 blocks, I found it pretty successful.
Yeah, I think that works really, really well. I really like using andesite as like a highlight for regular stone as well. I think it works very, very well to make it look like natural stone catching sunlight. I haven't messed around much with moss block as a shadow, or pale moss, I should say. But I've been using tuff as a shadow. But as you said, with only, was it like a 6 or 8 block wide boulder, like you don't have a lot of resolution to get into multiple textures before it would just start to look like a checkerboard, right?
Yeah, and I'm finding tuff works really well around the waterfalls because it's got slightly more of that shine to it that could maybe be like slick from the water being there and that kind of thing. Bit of mossy cobblestone and moss in the areas where the water feels a bit more stagnant, like the water isn't like pulling through anything that would have a chance to take root, you know. So I'm trying to think about it in terms of the natural world and work with what Minecraft gives us. But a really fun exercise, and the rest of the week has mainly been just kind of resource gathering and stuff like that, so I don't have much else to report. How about you? What's new on the Citadel?
So I'm still renovating the old potato farm. This week was spent not on the house, but on the outside, along the pathways and the, like we'll say, like tier changes from like the step up into the backyard, changing the size and width of the paths, because of course we changed the footprint of the house. And the paths then they took this huge swing like around where the house used to be. And I had to kind of tighten everything up and make it look a little bit more walkable. And in doing so, actually gave myself more green space to deal with on the very top level of this tiered farm. So I brought the beets up to that level. And I have a custom beet and custom potato texture. So the screenshots that people are seeing, just so you know, like you're looking at beets and potatoes in Minecraft, but they do have a custom texture, as does my wheat texture as well. The way that I wanted to break it up was it was just too green and too samey across the whole field. And so when I moved from finishing like all the greenery around the house, like bushes and vines and staircases and stuff, I focused on the next levels down, which got me into the crop field. And as I backed up farther, I realized that I really like the wheat field on, I guess it's the east side of the road, but the west side was just nothing but potatoes as far as the eye could see, which is realistic because I drive by potato farms around here when I go outside the city, and they do stretch for a very, very long way, but it's not as interesting in Minecraft. And so I decided to kind of bring those beets down to a certain level, and that cut out some of the potatoes. And then I took the lower field and completely removed all of the potatoes and lowered it by a block, so that the too high wheat crop didn't block the view of the rest of the field and the house. And essentially, I tried it actually with a couple of test wheat field chunks, and the too high wheat was because my texture is too high wheat was too tall, and it kind of blocked the view of things. So I had to lower the whole field. So a little tedious, but because I had already laid out all the different crop rows, I didn't really have to redesign it. I had to just move and copy paste everything down like an extra block. But it really worked out well. Having the wheat to frame the road as you travel south towards West Hill really, really works well. And then it creates like this yellow wheat for my custom texture, green potatoes, kind of like the pinkish and green of the beetroots, and then there's carrots even farther up the hill. So there's like 4 different crop textures that you can see from the road, and it really helps with the depth. And in doing so, walking around the crop field, I realized that I hadn't designed it to be walked around. Like as I was working on it, I was like, I keep on feeling like I'm stepping on things. And my brain thinks like, this doesn't make sense for a field. This would be really inefficient and really problematic as a farmer to try to walk around this field. So I ended up widening some of the roads and paths within the field. And in doing so, kind of exposed a weird kind of area where it was just like this brown slope. And it just felt like something that people would fall down or slip down. So I replaced that with more of a structured like wooden staircase where maybe the landscape would have been problematic and the farmers would have had to like build a structure to either hold the embankment back like a retaining wall, but then also you can't just scale the wall. You have to have some way to get down. So building some wooden stairs, creating like a work area. I haven't really finished any of that. Like the stairs are done, but like I need to put in something like a workbench and a barrel and maybe like a composter, or just something to show that it might be an area for activity. A barrel of water or a cauldron full of water would be really cool, because then you just like, all right, well, maybe this is where they come to get extra water for the crops, like that kind of stuff. And so that's still a work in progress, as is the stone wall that goes around the whole thing, and a couple of new stone walls that I've used to separate the different crops. There's a new stone wall that goes through the middle of the field now, and that's got a first pass on it, but it hasn't really had a final pass. And then the outside wall is just like either cobblestone or stone as like a placeholder. I need to kind of go around and extend that texture around the edge. But so far, it's come together really nice. I like the way that it frames everything up. It's really satisfying to go back to a build 4 years later, that you're not starting new, you're updating it and changing some things that you don't like about it, but you've got 4 years of building experience in the area. So you have a good color palette, you have a good style kind of guide, scale you've got a handle on, but then you've also just got 4 years of just like building techniques and like landscaping stuff, 4 years of extra blocks and new textures for Minecraft. And so it's just been really fun to be live on stream and doing this all from the hip. Like I don't have a plan. I can kind of look at this stuff and go like, this looks off, or this isn't quite where I want it to be. And I know just how to fix it. And it's just a matter of like tweaking a couple of things. I'm trying not to make too much work for myself. Like I don't want to redo the whole thing, but by adding just a few things here and there, I feel like I'm really bringing it up to match the level of other things that I've done in the area.
Yeah, it definitely meets that criteria for sure. I love the look of the like terraced kind of tiered farms. I think those are it's such a classic look, but one that's surprisingly difficult to pull off in Minecraft unless you've got the right kind of experience with it. And just the pleasant roundedness of the borders of each of these fields gives it a very kind of organic look, whilst obviously the rows of crops feel kind of more regimented, and they're almost like the rays of a sun coming out from the center. They're kind of like, you know, bursting out in that way, and it looks like really, really aesthetically pleasing. It must be really fun to walk around, and it definitely looks good from a distance with all of the other farms that you can see in the background having the same approach to farming all of their own crops. Like it's such an in style thing at the moment for your area to kind of have this consistency of design approach, and I think it works really, really well for this farm.
Thanks, man. Yeah, the tiered farm is interesting because you forget that you have to have like a path next to the wall to walk along. Then you have to have paths down between the rows, decide whether you want another path at the other end where there's another wall. And so you think like, I'm just going to make a crop field. And you think like, well, wait a minute, this is going to be 50% path. Like it's going to be 50% dirt block, or coarse dirt or other textures. And it's like that weird thing of like, you think you know what a tree looks like, or you think you know what a field looks like until you actually go to build one. You're like, oh, there's actually not as much crop in the field as I thought there was going to be. Yeah. And it's an interesting lesson. And it does help it when you're trying to make it functional to kind of have it line up with like how players would walk, but then also, like you said, trying to design it aesthetically. And I really appreciate that you noticed like the whole like radial kind of spokes of a wheel for the paths, because that's 100% intentional. And I have to say, a lot easier to do with Zero's minimap and Zero's world map mod that we have on the server, because I can then basically get like a pixel art top-down view, which you could do with a Minecraft map too. Like it would take a little bit longer to update, but this, at a touch of a button, I can kind of see whether I've gone over 2 blocks and down 1 block, or whether I've gone over 3 blocks and down 2 blocks, like that kind of stuff. And it does make it a little bit easier, especially for me with a background in art, to look at something and go, that looks like the right angle compared to where it started. And I can kind of have like an imaginary spoke or an imaginary hub where these spokes of paths are going from. Now, some of them are just straight, like the wheat field and potato fields are a little bit straighter, whereas the beetroot and the carrots had to be a little bit more of, like you said, that kind of like cascading spiral look. And they're a lot of fun. I think it's worth giving a go for anybody that wants to try to do a farm. To make it more interesting is to do like a tiered farm. And then, of course, you also have to think about, like, well, where your staircase is going to be. So there's a bunch of other traversal stuff to kind of consider when you do it. But it's a lot of fun to work out. And I have to say, like, when you have these large areas, granted, this case I needed to break up the large area of potatoes. But when you have a large area of a crop like wheat, or for me with a custom wheat texture that has variance in the heights, it's really satisfying to see it stretch to the edges of the peripheral vision, I guess. It reminds me of other video games. It reminds me of like level design in something like Assassin's Creed or something like that, where you've got this huge landscape that's seemingly stretching as far as the eye can see. And it's not meant to be something that you necessarily stare at. It's just kind of meant to kind of pass by and give you that immersion. And that's what I'm trying to go for here.
Yeah, I think the minimap is the ideal thing for it as well, because if you're trying to use in-game Minecraft maps, it's fine if you've started it towards the center of the map. But inevitably, whenever you open a map in Minecraft, there's always that moment of, oh wait, I'm on the edge of the map here, so I actually need to make one map over. And then if you try and upscale the map, it turns out that's the border of a region. And so you're actually, you're not seeing the scaled up area that you're working from. It doesn't center on the player when you open the map. It snaps to the grid, and so inevitably you end up having to have like 6 or 8 maps to really see, especially with the area, like the size that you're working at with West Hill now. Like, that's got to be such a large area to view in Minecraft map scale. So I think, working from the minimap is going to be a lot more approachable as a process if you're using it to view these fields from a top down.
I did at one point have maps up on the wall in the keep when I was first building West Hill, because I thought I'll just try. It'd be a fun thing to kind of track in game. I've seen players do it in other videos where they like update a map and then they'll put a piece of glass on it and call it like, oh, yeah, that was phase 1. And then we'll copy that and then we'll start a new map. And I feel like it was a good 6x9 on the wall of maps to cover not just the town, but like the whole valley, like all the way up from the river down to the base of the south gate of the town. But it was huge, like without going any scale, like it was just the single scale map. But I was like constantly flying around and updating these maps. Like, okay, this is kind of tedious. Like I need a better solution than this. It is fun. We do have something like that in the modern city in the visitor center, but it's meant to be kind of like a decoration. Like you can look up at the visitor center wall and see a map of the town, of the city of Southport, and that's meant to be there in that way so that we can have that visual representation in Minecraft. Moving into the news this week, there is a new snapshot. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W06A was released last Wednesday. I believe that was February 6th, if I did the math correctly. This week has been a lot of contemplating and existential questions from the Mojang team, like what came first, the cold chicken or the blue egg? It's time for the cold chicken and the warm chicken to make their way into Snapshot 25W06A, together with their respective colorful eggs. In addition, pink cactus flowers and dry grass will now decorate deserts and badlands. Under new features, added warm and cold chicken variants, added short dry grass and tall dry grass, and added cactus flower blocks, which can grow on cactus blocks. Farm animal variants. Warm and cold variants have been added for the chicken. The existing chicken variant has been renamed to temperate chicken. The chicken variant is determined by the biome they spawn in. Warm and cold biomes are the same for all animals with variants, i.e. chickens, pigs, and cows. 2 new egg items have been added to the warm and cold chicken variants. The blue egg, The egg is laid by and can hatch a cold chicken variant, and the brown egg. The egg is laid by and can hatch a warm chicken variant. The egg that exists already in the game is laid by and can hatch a temperate chicken variant. Short and tall dry grass. Added 2 new types of grass, short dry grass and tall dry grass. Both are 1 block high, which makes tall dry grass differ from tall grass, which is 2 blocks high. Both generate in deserts and badlands. Both can be placed on types of sand, terracotta, and dirt blocks like the dead bush. Both can be bone mealed. Using bone meal on short dry grass will grow it into tall dry grass. Using bone meal on tall dry grass places a neighboring short dry grass next to the block if possible. Both dry grass can be used in the composter. Sheep can eat both dry grasses to regrow its wool, and both dry grasses can be used as fuel for smelting. The cactus flower is a new type of flower which has a chance of generating on cactuses in deserts and badlands. Cactus flower can be placed on cactus blocks or any block which has a center support at the top of the block. Cactus flowers have a chance to grow on cactus blocks. If a cactus is 1 or 2 blocks high, the cactus flower has a 10% chance to grow instead of the cactus getting higher. If a cactus is 3 blocks high, the cactus flower has a 25% chance to grow. Cactus flowers will only grow if they have a space on all 4 sides. Cactus flowers can be used in the composter, and the cactus flower can be used to craft 1 pink dye. New changes in this week's snapshot. Instead of just 8 chunks around the player, any block in the simulation distance of a player or loaded by any other source of a chunk load, such as an ender pearl, may now receive random ticks. For example, if a chunk is loaded by an ender pearl or in the spawn chunks, crops are able to grow, ice can melt, snow can fall, and a cauldron can be filled by rain. Mob spawning, lava spreading fire, and lightning strikes still occur in the previous radius of 8 chunks around the player. Fire will no longer burn or spread if no player is within 8 chunks. Tooltips for fireworks and crossbows now show a compact form of multiple repeated stars or projectiles that are identical. Some changes to the firefly bush. Conditions for the firefly bush playing ambient sounds have changed. It now plays when all of the following conditions are met. It's nighttime in-game. The firefly bush is not blocked above by any collidable block except leaves.
There are some technical changes in this snapshot as well. Of course, the data pack version is now 66 and resource pack version is now 51. In data pack version 66, a new game rule has been added. Allow fire ticks away from player. When true, fire and lava ticks can occur outside of the previously stated 8-chunk range of a player, but this defaults to false. Block and item tags were also added to support some of the stuff that was added this week, including Dead Bush May Place On being renamed to Dry Vegetation May Place On to incorporate dry grass as well. They've also added Edible for Sheep as a tag for blocks that can be eaten by sheep to regrow their wool, and they've added Eggs as a tag for all variants of the egg item. The resource pack adds new and updated chicken textures, new textures for the brown egg and blue egg, the cactus flower, short dry grass and tall dry grass blocks, and new textures for chicken variants, the cold chicken and warm chicken. The regular chicken texture has been renamed to temperate chicken and moved to a new folder. Fixed bugs of note in 25W06A, leaf litter can only be placed on dirt-like blocks. Certain farm animals are not spawned as their cold variant in cold biomes due to an incomplete tag. Pigs spawn as temperate in desert villages. You can use bone meal on bushes in situations where nothing grows. The hitbox of bushes don't reach the ground and are too wide compared to other similar blocks. Bushes cannot be replaced by trees or mushrooms, and firefly bushes cannot be replaced by trees or mushrooms. All of those have been fixed, along with a handful of other bugs, so if you want the full list, check out the Minecraft.NET changelog, linked in our show notes over at thespawnchunks.com.
We will be discussing some of the new features like the cactus flowers, chickens, and dry grass in this week's main discussion. But there's a few other things to still talk about in the news. I think the top of the list for you and I, after the last few weeks of discussion, is that leaf litter is now something that can be placed on solid blocks, not just organic blocks like dirt and grass.
Yes, we did it. I was so happy. I loaded up the snapshot on stream this week and was talking about leaf litter, and someone said, "Oh no, they changed it." Immediately went and tried it, and was just so happy. Like I think, like we've said, I don't think any more needs to be said about this from me at least. But it makes perfect sense that you can put dead leaves anywhere, and leaf litter is really just like the kind of leaves that you would sweep off a path. So I think having a suburban home with leaf litter in the outside and like in the gutters and stuff when it's not just all organic blocks around still makes perfect sense. So I think it's wonderful that they've allowed that change. I think it's really good not to just stick to their guns after having implemented it in the same way as pink petals and wildflowers. So great move on Mojang's part, and I bet a lot of people are very, very happy about that change.
And there's also that sound that happens when you walk over a leaf litter, right? So like now you can actually have that sound of walking down a fall sidewalk in your modern city and have like leaves crunching underneath your feet if you wanted to go ahead and do that. I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm happy about it too. And I like your note about having it in like gutters, because you could have a tree or a custom tree next to your house and you could have leaves on that section of the roof, to kind of show that stuff has fallen off and maybe there's been some mulch or something gathering on your roof. It's a smart change. The other big news looks like it's the loaded chunk changes for me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Loaded chunks randomly ticking means that I can age my copper by keeping the chunks loaded with an ender pearl network. It's going to be a lot because I think ender pearls only currently load a 3x3 chunk area, and I'm not certain about the redstone ticks in that chunk because obviously that's also based on player simulation distance and stuff, right? But the fact that you can plant a field of copper somewhere and just leave a bunch of stuff chunk loading it, whether it's a nether portal or an ender pearl thing, and stuff will still age. Geodes can now form crystals with the player not being there, which is huge for automated amethyst farms. For anybody who's looked into that in the past and gone, no, there's no point because I'd have to keep it loaded even if I want flying machines or whatever to collect it for minimal yield. But yeah, if you want to make sure that your geode grows crystals while you're away instead of having to, go back to it every so often and just stand there for 90 minutes for all of the crystals to grow, I think it's perfect that they've done that as well. Crops growing off camera as well feels like a really important change. Obviously, a lot of this has to be done very intentionally by the player once you understand chunk loading and how it works, but you can now build a crop farm in the spawn chunks and have it grow naturally, which I think is lovely. And I think it's great that obviously some things are still dictated, like mob spawning and presumably mob AI, like whether or not mobs move around while the player is absent is still going to be dictated by player proximity and simulation distance. So I think that's obviously going to make sense. And I think they've made fire the exception also a really good change, because otherwise entire sections of a forest burn down more so than they already do when you're like flying over and you see a lava lake surrounded by trees, So I do think there's going to be a precedent for there not being too much fire spread that the player isn't able to immediately see and try and have an impact on. But I think it's really good that they've made this change. I'm wondering how the technical community feels about this, so it would be great to get some email from anyone who's more into the technical side of the game, how much stuff you anticipate this being a problem for and breaking, because as far as I'm concerned, it's great that I can now chunk load a bunch of my farms, but I don't know for certain if there are going to be some things that are negatively impacted by this, and I'd love to hear from technical players about that.
The only thing off the top of my head as far as technical stuff that might be impacted would be any build that was relying on being on the edge of a specific chunk to function, whether like that's where you wanted something to stop working or to start working. And if that's now changed because it's no longer 8 chunks from the player, it's just loaded chunks or based on simulation distance from the player, then that might change. But I can't think of an example of I'm not technical enough to know what that might be, but that's the only thing I can think of, because I'm thinking of what happens for me, which is a bad thing, which is flying machines stopping to working when you fly out of the loaded chunks and you forget to turn them off before you leave, and then your flying machine is broken. So having this on will hopefully fix that. I feel like, again, technical players, if you know, spawnchunkmail@gmail.com, let us know. I do also like that the game rule has the allow fire ticks always from or away from the player. No, there's no the in there, from player. So that if it's something that you don't want, you could turn it off. Like if you don't like the fact that you're keeping yourself from burning down forests, if you want to be the opposite of Smokey the Bear, then you can just turn that back off. Having those commands, I think, is good for anybody that's maybe working with an older version of Minecraft or was trying to do something specific, and then these changes thwart that, having that kind of player control in the back end is nice.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to bring up from this is the Firefly Bush ambience, because I noticed that when I loaded up the Snapshot for the first time, and I was convinced that these were brand new sounds. It turns out they just changed the likelihood of the sounds triggering when a player is nearby, but they've also given the ambience a couple of conditions, like it has to be nighttime for the sound to trigger, and it also has to be exposed to the open air, like there has to be an empty air block above a firefly bush, or a leaf block apparently. And I think that's great, because one of the first things I tried doing with the firefly bush was hiding them underground, just underneath a layer of grass blocks, to see if I could get the particles without the bushes being there, which of course works. So I think it's really cool that you can hide the noise of that while still allowing for that sort of more magical particle effect to happen from a hidden source. Really, really cool change. And I think those kind of conditional things for ambient sounds are going to be really helpful for players who want to have a lot more control over that, especially since I think the ambience builds the more of them you have, and players are going to want to have a lot of these in a small area. But if you want to hide a firefly bush in a tree or something like that, you can have it put up there with a log over the top of it, and you're not going to get the buzzing sound coming from the tree, you're just going to get the particles. I think really smart move, and they're making a lot of really good, small, almost quality of life, but very logical decisions about how these things can work for players. And like I'm genuinely seeing a lot of really intelligent decisions being made when they implement new stuff like this. So hats off to Mojang for thinking of everything this time around.
Yeah, I like the idea of being able to hide a firefly bush in a tree or in something like that and controlling it. Player control is always a good thing in my books as well. The one thing I noticed too was that there's a lot of bug fixes for the new recent features like bushes, firefly bushes. And so it makes me wonder how far we are away from the drop actually coming out. If I was to guess, I'm going to say maybe early March is the plan. Whether or not that happens depends on probably bugs and different adjustments and player feedback. But we've got a Minecraft movie slated for April 4th. We traditionally have an update in June, like a big named update in June, have had the last few years. So one would hope that they're going to announce that probably a month or two ahead of time, which suggests, again, probably some sort of announcement in April, either coinciding with the Minecraft movie or happening shortly thereafter. So I would imagine they would want the drop to be out and have its own news cycle within the Minecraft community before moving into like Minecraft movie hype and then whatever it is down the road. Because they did mention there was supposed to be more than one Minecraft Live, right, annually now.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they're going to line that up, but it does say to me that we're probably going to get this sooner than later in terms of the drop cycle.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how quickly we found out about the Pale Garden at Minecraft Live in October, and then it was out in early December. So, I mean, this
8 weeks.
could be like a really, really short snapshot cycle, and that's just the sort of the cadence of development going forward. And then maybe at Minecraft Live we hear about what they've got planned for a next major update, or maybe they just tell us about what else is coming. But I think this has been a really fun snapshot cycle to be a part of, because all of these features that are coming out are little ambient things which a lot of people seem to be quite excited about just because of it adding diversity to the natural world. We're going to talk more about that in the main discussion, of course, with the addition of the new chickens and everything, but everything seems to be going on the right track so far. We're going to move on into chunk mail then. If you'd like to email the show, the email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. We always try and read one or two emails on every show, and we also have our chunk mail dispenser episodes where we focus on listener emails. So if you'd like to send some stuff in, of course, please keep your emails short and to the point. Helps us include them in the show more easily. And also, if you're a patron of the show, let us know in the subject line, because we'd also like to prioritize some of the email from our closer community. This first email comes in from Berserk Swan with the subject of sheep wool growth changes. Hi, Johnny and Joel. In episode 333, you were discussing what potential changes to sheep could be implemented in light of the updates to pigs, cows, and now chickens. Sheep currently have only 2 stages of wool growth, either with or without wool, and they drop 1 to 3 wool when sheared. In nature, however, sheep wool grows continually until such time as it is sheared by a farmer or shed. See the famous case of Barak the sheep here in Australia. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as an article from The Guardian. I proposed that the Minecraft sheep wool growth mechanic could be changed to have a 4-stage system: shorn, short, medium, and overgrown, which could either be progressed through a multi-stage growth cycle like crops, or could grow to a random value when a sheep eats grass. Each stage of growth could drop a different quantity of wool when shorn, which would offer both the aesthetic model update and a gameplay change, including a fun optimization challenge for automatic wool farms. What do you think? Berserk Swan died of shock when the overgrown sheep dropped 8 wool blocks.
I really like this idea. Sheep progressing through their wool stages makes sense. And I guess the example of shorn that Berserk Swan gave and medium would be the stages that we see sheep in now in the game, right? There's like with wool and without wool. And even without wool kind of has like little bits still left on the sheep. They're not completely pink. They've got like little bits in there. Although if I remember correctly, it's the same texture for all sheep. So when you shear a bunch of sheep, you can't tell what color they are until they grow their wool back. Like if you've dyed the sheep.
In Java Edition, that's the case. In Bedrock Edition, I believe the texture does change for all of the sheared ones as well. Like, you can kind of see hints of the color, even though the coat is completely gone. Although, I'm not certain if that's still the case or if that's just a legacy Bedrock thing. But that's what I remember from having played, yeah.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I guess, for me, the cartoonist in me comes out and thinks, like, the overgrown sheep could be very funny in the blocky style of Minecraft. Like, in the same way that goats are kind of silly and camels are kind of silly in Minecraft. Like, I feel like you could really kind of go over the top. I'm thinking of like, I feel like it's a Pixar short where there's like a dancing lamb or something before one of the movies. And every time it moves, like its whole head of like floofy wool kind of bounces back and forth. And you can see like a sheep having the same kind of woolly cowl that like a Highland cow would have, like the fringe, you know, and have it just be completely overdone. It might look a little bit funny walking around in Minecraft because of the way that sheeps are animated. But yeah, I think that would be really fun.
I love the mental picture of a real chunky sheep. Like, I just think it's such a fun idea. And like the notion that they drop 8 wool blocks is kind of actually kind of forestalling one of the points I had about this, which was the wool farm thing. Like, I was fairly certain that under this model where they kind of go through multiple stages, wool farms would just end up remaining the same, because shearing a sheep for 1 wool as soon as it eats would yield exactly the same amount as waiting twice as long to shear them for 2 wool. But if you increase the yield, the more it builds up, then there is incentive, I guess, to wait for that overgrown stage before you shear it, and then you get more wool dropping. Otherwise, the only thing you'd be doing is saving durability on shears. But yeah, like, I like the idea of a sheep dropping a guaranteed 3 wool for early game. Like, the amount of times I've started a fresh world, or like when I play Minecraft Bingo, for example, one of the items you can get on the card is a red bed. And so typically, if I can't find a village right away, I'll just be shearing sheep and dyeing the wool. But it's really frustrating when a sheep only drops 1 wool, and it's the only sheep for miles around, and you have to wait for it to regrow the wool or just start looking for other sources of it. Like, having a sheep guaranteed to drop a certain amount just because it's really fluffy and overgrown feels like fun gameplay, to seek out that one sheep that's been really eating the grass. And I think this idea goes against the grain of the last few updates we've seen with the warm and cold variants, but still in a way that works for the existing sheep that we already have. We don't have to introduce like 16 variants of a brand new mob. It just introduces additional stages and like maybe even a little bit more character to some of these other sheep. You could almost imagine having them in warmer biomes and colder biomes, but with just different natural levels that they generate with. So the overgrown sheep are going to generate more frequently in taiga biomes than they do in savanna biomes, for example. And that could work well for the presumed biology of these Minecraft animals, even without changing the textures of them.
I like that idea of having a biome-specific effect on the type of sheep wool growth, you know, like not as much wool in the hot biomes versus you'd have a better chance to have like an overgrown sheep in a cold biome where the sheep might try to keep themselves warmer. That's a neat idea, because I had the same thought when it came to like thinking about what we could do for sheep variants, because like just like anything else that's a color in Minecraft or would receive color in Minecraft, you have to add like 16 colors. You can't just do the one, right? And I like that idea of keeping the sheep roughly the same, but then bringing it up to kind of like the level of farm variance that they're doing right now. One thing that I do like is the idea of maybe not having every sheep be able to be an overgrown sheep. Like, what if there's only a percentage chance out of your, breeding your sheep that the baby will grow up to be like a big sheep, like a really floofy one. And that could mean that, the efficiency of your wool farm would mean like, well, you have to breed a bunch of sheep and then you have to pick like the mega sheep and get those in your wool farm, because those are the ones that are going to give you like the heavy wool block yields. And that could be kind of fun. And then also Berserk Swan mentioned, what if they didn't grow in stages? Like, what if it was just a random chance to like go from 0 to a full stage? And for me, there's a real fun opportunity to have like a cartoony, almost like the sheep is shocked by how much wool it just grew, and have it like jump into the air and have its legs splayed out when it pops into being this giant woolly sheep.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's from playing so much Core Keeper recently. When crops and different things happen in Core Keeper, they kind of have an animated pop. There's a noise, they kind of jump. And I think it would be really funny to have the sheep kind of like leave the ground a little bit when they grow their wool. Right now, it's just like a blip. It's like a frame of animation. It just kind of appears. There's no real, I guess, environmental reaction to anything around it or the sheep in general. It would be even funnier if like a sheep went from 0 to floofy sheep, and then other sheep scattered because it scared them. Like it's asking a lot, but just my brain just kind of goes with how much fun you could have with that kind of I will say realistic, but also bizarre take on what could happen with sheep, because we'll encourage everybody to check out the Guardian link that we'll include for a Barak, the sheep from Australia, because that's a sight. that's quite a full sheep, we'll say, for folks to check out.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, I like the idea of them having some sort of animation like that. We've talked in the past about like modifying and modernizing some of the animal animations to give them a bit more character and bring them in line with like 2025 Minecraft. And I wonder if that could be done not necessarily through changing their existing idle animation, but just by adding more stuff like that would give them a touch of character every so often. So it doesn't change like the day-to-day of what a Minecraft sheep looks like, but then sometimes if the wool would suddenly pop out, like you get to witness this kind of silly moment. Kind of like, this happened to me the other day actually, when you go to the Nether and you find piglins hunting hoglins and then they all do that dance at the end. Like
right.
Those things that you only see every so often, but it just gives an extra spark of life to what's otherwise a fairly mundane aspect of Minecraft in the day-to-day. I love that idea. I think that's a really, really fun one.
Sunnybrook1 in our live chat is saying that shivering in a cold biome when a sheep is shorn would be sad, but also accurate and add a little bit of character, like you're saying.
Yeah, kind of like striders do when they're outside of lava, you know?
Exactly.
I worry that the immediate player reaction is like, oh, the sheep is cold, throw it in lava like the strider, and then you end up with cooked mutton very briefly, and then nothing much to show for it after that.
Nothing at all. Yeah. Our next email is going to bring us into the main discussion, actually. It's from Arcane Ghoul, something most foul. I mean, already it's ominous, right? Hi, Pix and Joel. So it looks like the ambient snapshot theme continues, and the most recent snapshot contains even more ambience that I'm incredibly excited for, including chicken variants. To keep it short, I'm not quite sold on the new chicken designs. I understand the current path Mojang is trying to follow by keeping the animal models close to their original shapes. While I enjoy the new pigs and cows, the chicken seems to have fallen short for me. I've seen a lot of community consensus pre-update related to the fact that many people think the default chicken looks like a duck, and I've fallen into that trap again. Sure, the cold chicken has that fluff on its head, but I'm not sure it's a positive. The tail is in the right direction, though. I've seen so many modders make good-looking chicken texture without tweaking the model too far, and I'm wishing Mojang had done the same instead of keeping with the duck style. I'm adding some okay additions with the variants. Thoughts? Arcane Ghoul experienced gravity at the bottom of a ravine after being distracted by a chicken. Well, that's what you get for making fun of the chickens.
Yes,
they lure you right off the edge.
And the chickens don't experience gravity because they just flap down harmlessly. So yeah, that's what you get for messing with the chickens. Yeah. So let's talk about them having messed with chickens, because obviously our main discussion this week was going to be about the new chickens, dry grass. Sorry, they've added more tongue twisters to Minecraft again, Joel. I don't know how they've done it, but tall, dry grass is so difficult to say in a way that you wouldn't expect. But yeah, those and cactus flowers are the main sort of additions, having talked about some of the technical changes in the news segment earlier. So I guess we can probably kick off by talking about chickens. How do you feel about the new chickens?
I really like the look of the cold biome chickens. I think I might be calling them chili chickens from now on. They're more interesting and more different than what do they call them? Temperate chickens now. It's an interesting model. The texture change is broad enough that like you can look at them immediately. Like there's a contrast change, there's a hue change, there's a silhouette change. So like right away, you can absolutely tell. And I think that's one of the things that I, as a character designer, like I look at the silhouettes of different things. And if you black out these chickens, the warm chicken and the temperate chicken, I mean, there are some differences, but like it's really difficult. Whereas if you black out the cold chicken, like you can immediately tell, like it's got a little bit taller, it's got a different tail, different head feathers, like it stands out. And so I think that that's a more successful redesign. I'm unsurprised, though a tiny bit disappointed they didn't update the chickens to look less like ducks. But we've talked about this before. I think it's in part trying to not rock the boat. There's also a lot of merchandise and imagery around the Minecraft chicken, a lot of zombie babies riding chickens. I've designed a Minecraft logo with a Minecraft baby zombie riding a chicken. So like I know that it's out there. And so some of that stuff would look dated depending on, the people's interpretation of it. So like I know why they didn't do it. It's kind of one of those things where you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I can see why they didn't. I do find that the cold chickens remind me of Feathers McGraw from Wallace and Gromit, if anybody's familiar with that animation series. It's basically a penguin with a rubber glove on its head.
Yeah.
And it does sort of have that vibe where like because the chicken head shape and body shape didn't really change, they just kind of stuck a rubber glove on its head. I mean, it's not the case. I still really like the cold chicken, but it does kind of have that, like, we just kind of stuck stuff to it and now we're calling it a cold chicken. And so like there is a little bit of that there, but when you do have a limited, we'll say, resolution like Minecraft, and we're now dealing with one of the smaller mobs, like we're updating a mob that's like not even a block tall. So you can get a lot more texture and a lot more variation into something like a cow than you can a chicken, and so they're probably pretty limited as to what they can do. But I like them so far. I thought it was a nice touch that the eggs are blue, because that is going to help you differentiate like what is happening and where. If you're breeding chickens together, and or if you're collecting eggs, like what happens there. And I realized this just as I was writing the notes this morning. If you've got chicken farms and they're all together, you could use item filters to separate the eggs. Like you could have your cold chickens and warm chickens and tempered chickens all go in different places based on the eggs that they're dropping. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, having a lot more control over it that way. Yeah, I agree. I think the cold chicken is probably my favorite too. I'm thinking of it as the cool chicken because it's got like the slick back hair. It's like rockabilly chicken. And yeah, I think it's interesting the way they've adapted to their own style guide, really. I remember when they were simplifying the model for the horse and I think the wither a little while ago to more closely conform with modern Minecraft style guide. They were made more boxy, just generally. Like they are collections of boxes instead of being like a series of smaller boxes and like thinner and wider and having like different, like the hooves of the horses were like slightly more detailed before in terms of the model. And they've stuck to that with recent mobs, but what they've done is added thin pixels, like 2D pixels to stuff that can be added as like dangling sections off the side of a sniffer or the cold pig or the cold cow now. And they've done the same with the cold chicken, which is to have this kind of like fringe of pixels come out and then down that doesn't add an extra block onto the back of the chicken but adds a little bit of texture nonetheless, because it's 2D but can obviously be seen from a lot of different angles. It's rare that you're looking at it side on and you don't see that part of the model. So I think it's really effective, and like a surprisingly effective way that they're using their own rules to create more texture and a bit more variety in the model of these chickens. And I, for one, have never been bothered by the duck model. I can see why people are. Like I don't deny its impact, but it's never really bugged me. Like I'm fine with this thing. The saying obviously is, if it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, well, this looks like a duck and clucks like a chicken. So which one you believe is really up to you. And I think it's a chicken for me. But I think having a bit more variety in them is really nice. I think the different color eggs are very fun. Like I can see a lot of families doing fun like roleplay Easter egg hunts in Minecraft now, especially when they have 3 variants of chicken egg. They also have turtle eggs and sniffer eggs, and you can get into some variety there, which is really, really fun. And I think the only concern people had about adding the new eggs was obviously that increases clutter. There's just new items and eggs only stack to 16. But how often do you really keep eggs anyway? Like pretty much most of the time, unless I'm taking them for a specific cake recipe, or if I'm looking for enough eggs that I can gather up to make a chicken farm or something, I just throw most of the eggs that I get. I just throw them on the ground. If there are more chickens there, great. So I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue as far as clutter goes to add 2 more eggs to help with differentiating the chickens. My last point on chickens as far as like the model and stuff goes really is that anything that can be adjusted with a resource pack is open to people making whatever they want from it. And we talked about modders in the email here. I think, frankly, there are some very talented resource pack creators out there who would happily just reskin a chicken as a chicken, and you wouldn't really notice the difference after a while. And I think if small tweaks like that can be made to your vanilla Minecraft experience in a way that smooths over some of the pain points of like, this chicken looks like a duck to you, then I think go for it. There's really no harm in adjusting your vanilla experience to what you might expect from something like a chicken. So I think that's worth doing.
I mean, you could just change the beak shape. Like that might be all it takes, right? Because as you said, it makes the chicken cluck noise. So once you get that far, like you just kind of eliminate the flat bill look, and then you're good. I am a bit of a devil's advocate when it comes to the chicken duck thing. I think it's funny to poke at, but like I don't really care either way. I feel like I had that experience in my very early Minecraft days where you come across a chicken and you go, and the character designer in me like, oh cool, there's ducks, and it clucks. I mean chickens. Like you just, it's very clear what it is. You don't get confused in the game when you see them. And I have gone in and either downloaded texture packs from vanillatweaks.net or kind of made my own, where I didn't like the 1 pixel wide texture that they overlay on certain things in the game. I'm thinking of my trapdoors and doors. I've got 3D trapdoors and doors, so they actually have like a depth to them. And if you are not a fan of what's happening with the cold weather chicken, you could add some depth to those feathers on its head. Or even like if you didn't like how skinny the chicken legs were, you could add like a full pixel width to those if you wanted to have them look a little bit more realistic in that way. And those are kind of tweaks that you can make with texture packs that can still stay true to what Mojang is trying to do, but maybe add some clarity to it, like changing the width of the tail or adding something to the warm weather chicken. How are you feeling about the warm weather chicken? Does it matter to you, or does you feel like it's just a little bit too samey compared to the temperate chicken?
It was the first one that I encountered when I loaded the snapshot up. I randomly stumbled upon one in a jungle, and I thought it was great. Like it's fine. It's a chicken with a different character, and I think that's good. I didn't really have like an immediate attachment to it the way I did the cold chicken, just because the model was exactly the same, and so it didn't feel like it was providing as much new stuff. Although the new stuff is very aesthetic, and so it's really up to you. But blue chickens like that are uncommon enough in real life that I think those were the ones that I wanted to make a beeline for. They were the ones that most excited me, whereas the warm chickens and temperate chickens just look like what I picture when somebody asks me to picture a chicken. So I think having something that bucks that trend is honestly kind of fun in the cold chicken, which is why I gravitated towards those as the main thing I wanted to find, which took a while because it turned out I spawned near a lot of very warm biomes, but I tracked one down eventually and they were worth the wait.
So as builders and landscapers, as of late, we've got some new textures coming to the game. How do you feel about the new dry grass?
So the main thing that stood out to me is that it stands out. There's something about the way those X-shaped model grass, sugarcane, and so forth are rendered compared to blocks that meant when I spotted these, like they were so visible. The lighting feels very uniform on them, and they have a highlight towards the top of them. The block kind of starts a little bit kind of sandy, grainy yellow, and then gets a little bit whiter towards the top. And something about that feels very bright and almost like off-puttingly bright against the sand blocks of a desert. Like it feels like less of a problem in Badlands. But that is the only thing that I could think of that's a negative about these. I think adding more life to deserts is great. I think having two variants of it gives us so much more to work with than it just being like, you know, a single thing like short grass. And yeah, I like the texture. I like the versatility. I like the fact that you could put these in a wheat field, and then that's just like a wheat plant that hasn't grown quite the same way that the other plants around it have. If you're just building for aesthetics and not for harvesting the wheat as a crop, I think you can do tons with this stuff. And between that and leaf litter and a few of the other things we've got, even bringing bushes into these biomes because they will change with the biome tint, I think we've got such a diverse range of ambient plant life now in Minecraft that I think is really quite cool. And also interesting that now that they've added sheep to biomes like deserts and badlands, they have the option to munch on this dry grass to regrow their wool, where there were no grass blocks around for them to do that before, giving it utility. And that's something I was not expecting from dry grass. Read that in the snapshot notes and thought, I hadn't realized that sheep behavior was going to need to change somewhat for them to be more viable in those warm biomes. So I think that's a really smart change as well.
How would you set up a dry grass sheep farm? Like you'd have to have something to bone meal the dry grass and then have the sheep eat the dry grass. So an added step, but if a dry biome like a desert or a badlands is where you want to be, then that could be really beneficial. I mean, I guess you could always just bring a grass block into the desert. It's not going to look very nice, but the sheep will still eat it, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have options there, but I think having a dry grass, I'm not sure if they destroy it, but I presume they do if they eat it, similar to how they revert a grass block to dirt. But I like the idea of having almost like a sheep feeding station where you'd bone meal these, and they work the same way that bushes, I think, do, where they'll try and grow one in the adjacent spaces if they're available.
Yeah, they do, yeah.
And so you could maybe fence that off so that the sheep can come up and eat the main block that it creates when it's bone meal, but it's not they're not eating the source block of the dry grass. So like you can spread the dry grass a little bit and make sure that the sheep doesn't eat the main one. And I think you could do a lot of fun like sheep farming stuff with that, maybe like a Wild West kind of scenario where they brought some animals with them, they're driving the cattle and they're bringing sheep and stuff with them as well. I think you could do some fun Badlands builds or desert builds with that. One other thing about dry grass that I've noticed people suggesting is that there should be a desert biome, like a sub-biome, maybe like sand dunes or something like that doesn't have any dry grass for variety. Because I think the problem now is that with all of these features being added for biome diversity, but they're being added to biomes where there aren't a great deal of sub-biomes. I'm pretty sure there is still only one desert biome, give or take height variation, whereas Badlands obviously has eroded and wooded variants, right? I think the novelty starts to wear off, and then they become homogenous, and that feels bad for diversity instead of the initial addition of them being good for diversity. So it's something that you're guaranteed to find when you go to any desert biome regardless, and it's always going to be there until you start maybe like landscaping the place yourself. So I kind of wonder if there's going to be a pushback against stuff like this, and maybe an incentive for Mojang to revisit deserts to have sub-biomes so that they can create like a more sand dune environment where there is less organic growth there, and it feels a bit more like the classic desert. Although the cactus flowers are a really great addition too, so like I'm happy to find those wherever, but they seem a little bit more sparse than the dry grass that's just kind of been added like dead bushes, kind of dotted all around the place, right?
Yeah, I like the look of the dry grass all over the place. I think it adds some cool contrast. I took a look at the article and some of the screenshots live on stream during the week when it came out, and especially in Badlands, like you really see the highlight of the dry grass, and it stands out. But it also creates a more interesting contrast when you're looking at the landscape. So I
Yeah.
didn't mind it all that much. And to add to your sentiment earlier about like being able to work the dry grass in with other things, like I had wheat, whether you've got a custom texture like me, which was very close to dry grass, or even the regular texture that's in the game, vanilla, dry grass, the firefly bush, along with maybe a dead bush, mangrove roots, and leaf litter. And you've got a really decent palette for landscaping decoration in your western town, your post-apocalyptic, like Fallout shelter kind of area. Like there's all kinds of really cool stuff that you could do with these new textures, especially if you decide to live in a desert or live in a badlands, and that's where you want to create your base. Where I don't know if a lot of people do that because there wasn't as much to work with, and bringing in a lot of the greenery just kind of looked brown, and like it wasn't really the best. Like it kind of clashed. It was kind of muddy and gross looking, like dead looking, as opposed to dry looking, which I think it's a important distinction to make, especially having done some hiking a few years ago in the desert, and it's really pretty in the desert, and there's more life around than you think in terms of like especially in the North American deserts. Like it's not quite like the dune deserts of like the Sahara that you see in movies and whatnot. Like not like Tatooine and Star Wars where there's like a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah.
So I think that this gives players some opportunities. I didn't find that it was overwhelming. I didn't necessarily see or seek out a lot of it in the desert though. Most of what I saw was in the Badlands. So I'll have to keep an eye out for it as I explore more with it. The one thing that I'm finding strange with the new grass and the new bushes is it's a little inconsistent compared to other things in the game. So we have grass and tall grass. Grass turns into tall grass when you bone meal it. Dry grass turns into tall dry grass when you bone meal it, but it's only 1 block tall. If you continue to bone meal it, it then spreads in like a plus shape on the ground if it has room to do so.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, then nothing happens. I believe they've corrected the error where your bone meal would go away. They did it for bushes anyway, the bush block that came out a week or two ago. And bushes do that. So bushes, you bone meal a bush, and again, it goes in like a plus shape on the ground if it has room to do so. Firefly bushes don't do that. Firefly bushes just drop a firefly bush item, much like if you bone meal a too tall flower like a rose bush or a lilac.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a firefly bush more than 1 block tall? It's like a block and a half, block and a quarter. I don't remember. It's not too tall.
I thought it was just 1 block tall. I thought they were still like tall. Fairly small plants. Yeah.
Right. So if you give a player bone meal and you stack these things in front of them and they walk up and they bone meal these things, several of them are going to act different despite looking the same. And so I'm wondering if there's a medium in there where they could say like, well, look, because I don't find, with your example of the sheep farm a few minutes ago as an outlier, because I think that's cool, and it wouldn't work if I get my suggestion, which is I think that dry grass, after you bone meal it to its second height, should just drop more dry grass. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the bush. Once you've got the bush there's no other height to the bush. It's just a bush. When you bone meal the bush, I feel like you should just get more bushes because, and this might be me as a player, specifically, this might be me as a content creator. Like, I just want to place the things exactly where I want them placed. I don't want to bone meal the thing and have it go in a random direction, me not knowing which way it's going to go, unless I've blocked off the other 3. And so ultimately what's going to happen, I feel, is that players that want to use these as in decorations are going to set up like an auto farm where they have blocked off all 3 directions with the exception of 1. They're going to have something bone mealing the bush, and then they're going to collect the bush that grows, and then they're going to place those elsewhere. I don't see this bone mealing in the wild really happening for any other purpose other than just annoying people and having it not go where you want. Because when I'm placing things in landscaping, I want them to go in a very specific spot to the point where I will break and replace them 3 times,
Yeah.
And then that's a me thing. So yeah, I do find it a little bit inconsistent. And this is, reaching and very much I'm aware of me asking for one more thing after just getting 6 new things. But I do wish that we would have a similar mechanic to grass where if it started off short, we bone mealed it then went to full block height grass, and we bone meal it again and it goes to tall grass. Because one of the things that I would love to have when I'm dealing with the regular grass block as decoration is something that's not a full block or almost a full block tall. They're all the same. It's just a matter of the only variation in grass is where it is in the block. Like it changes depending on, I think it's the block ID that gives you it's like flowers. They never appear right in the dead center of the block. They kind of they go in random places. And that's the same with the grass block. I haven't noticed the same thing with the dry grass. Dry grass looks like it might be more center. So again, different behavior for something that looks very similar to other things in the game. So there's just some inconsistency that I don't know whether I'm really criticizing them. I'm just kind of confused as to why they exist and why it's not a little bit more straightforward as to how they all operate.
Well, yeah, the thing about the dry grass especially is that, if you think about the way you get more regular grass, is that you bone meal a grass block, and that grows an area of short and tall grass along with a couple of flowers, usually, if you're in the right biome for that. Whereas with this, you can't just bone meal the sand and get dry grass to grow, right? So there has to be a way of obtaining it beyond just throwing down some bone meal and getting the shears out. But I think, they can make these decisions and then maybe see which go over better with the player base. So there's obviously still room for some of that to change, and player preference is going to dictate some of that. I think they're not necessarily looking for what we might call, I guess, biological uniformity with some of these different species. And I think, if anything, the firefly bushes are meant to be more of a one-off, in a similar way to how the tall flowers work, where they're more like an aesthetic thing that you pick up one or two of them and you place down, whereas the ones that they have bone mealing and spreading, those are potentially some that you would use aesthetically and just want to whack one down, and then you can spam it with bone meal if you want a bit more group, like a clump of bushes all growing in one place. I wonder if maybe they play tested those internally and decided that was better for casual use versus people like you and I who are the more kind of seasoned and exacting builders who want very specific things and will, shear and bring the grass with us, as opposed to just growing it in situ and bone mealing whatever block is available, right? Like what I've been doing with the pale moss blocks, where I'm bringing in ferns and grass to place on them, like that kind of thing. So yeah, there's potentially a few different options for what they could do with that, but I don't know if they're necessarily going for uniformity of mechanics so much as they are just seeing what players like about these proposed mechanics and maybe adjusting that in between.
And the cactus flowers, I think, for player control is a good thing too. And you have to correct me if I'm wrong here. So they only grow on cactus in deserts and badland biomes, but you, the player, can place them on cactuses outside of that intentionally, right?
Yes. Let me quickly take a look through the changelog again, because they're a new type of flower which has a chance of generating on cactus in deserts and badlands. That doesn't necessarily mean, from what I understand of the wording of this, they have a chance to naturally generate there, but it's not like you can't grow cactus in a different biome and not get a cactus flower. It's more just that they are native to those biomes, right? Does that make sense? I think
that makes sense.
So it's possible to grow cactus flowers if you take them back to your base and grow cactus around there. From what I understand, though, they've managed to figure it out where they're not going to interfere with existing cactus farms, because the cactus flower needs vacant space around the top of the cactus block before it will grow, where cactus prefers that, but if it detects a block next to it when it grows, it will just pop off. Whereas a cactus flower won't grow there in the first place, so you're not going to find your cactus farms end up suddenly stifled by the natural growth of these cactus flowers, which is pretty smart. But yeah, it seems like they are available in all biomes, and you can shear them and place them elsewhere, and you can obtain them in whatever biome, but they are going to appear naturally on cacti that generate in deserts and badlands.
Okay, cool. No, that's what I was wondering. I was wondering if the flower mechanic or the flower growth in the biome is what was going to stop the growth of flowers in a cactus farm. But that makes a lot more sense, because then if you have a cactus farm in a badlands or in a desert, then it'll still function the way that you want it to function. So I like the look of them. I mean, they look pretty and cool. I mean, it would be nice if there would be more colors, because I obviously know that cactus have various colors of flowers, but at the same time, I mean, more player control is good. So then having this cactus randomly grow a flower, or like how do you control what flower it grows and does it change? And so like if you're growing a cactus and it puts a flower that's yellow and you wanted a pink one, like that would be frustrating as a player. So I can understand how they kind of had to go and choose one.
Yeah. Like I think the pink cactus flowers stand out. They're a really great contrast with green cacti. And I think when I imagine cactus flower, I think the first thing I think of is a pink one. I've seen some of those in like other video games as well. Like there's a cactus enemy in the Final Fantasy games where there's like an exotic version of it that grows a pink flower, and I just think of that as like a cactus flower. Sure, why not? So I think they're like good as far as decorative video game element. I think it's fun to have another source of pink dye from them as well. And I think the smartest thing about them is that they limit the cacti in deserts from becoming too uniform, right? Like you don't always get cacti growing 3 blocks high anymore. If you spend enough time around a desert, then right now the way you'd have it is all of them would just grow to 3 blocks high and every cactus looks the same. Whereas with this, they can stop at 1 or 2 blocks high with a flower on them, sort of similar to how chorus plants grow, where the flower will like close up and it won't grow anymore. Kind of a similar mechanic, I suppose. Obviously cacti don't grow that high naturally, but I think it's a great addition for natural desert diversity along with the dry grass. I think it's fun that deserts have had like a little mini biome update with being able to have all of these variants of animals now and also a few extra flora being added to the area. And I think it's just, again, a really smart decision that they've implemented it in a way that doesn't break existing cactus farms. Like Mojang really thought that one through when they were figuring out the mechanics of it. I also, by the way, while we're on the topic of deserts, looked into what it takes to get an area of terracotta or sand to produce that kind of whispery sand desert sound, and confirmed that even if you build a really large wall of it, as long as it's a flat, maybe 1 or 2 block thick wall, you are not going to get any like sandy sound effects from it. It has to be a really large blocked in area of terracotta or sand for it to produce any ambient sounds. So builders are actually relatively safe from ending up with their builds sounding like they're in the desert, even if they're not, which was my concern because I built a storage room with a lot of colored terracotta in there. And I think it's really smart the way that they've implemented those systems in a way that isn't really going to affect players' existing builds unless they've done something that feels like they would want that kind of ambient sound effect anyway. And I feel the same about the cactus flower thing. Like, you're not going to find that your cactus farm is completely overrun with these things by the time you log in this new update. It's going to be very compatible with players' existing ways of playing and just adding a little bit extra for players who want to go out there and find a new desert.
I think it's a really good example too of like the knock-on effect of like quote unquote just adding a new cactus flower to Minecraft, and all of a sudden like technically you have to go, whoa, no, wait, we can't just do this. Like we have to figure out all kinds of domino effects down the line and how that's going to work. One of the things that I'm glad that they thought of though is that you can actually place the cactus flower on something other than cactus. It has to be a block with a central support. And Emery's in our Snapshot chat room in our Discord posted a shot of cactus flowers next to lily pads in a river or an ocean biome or a swamp biome maybe. And it's because they're on glass panes.
Yes. I think
very,
that's
very cool.
A very smart move. I had somebody in my stream chat suggest putting one on the end of a lightning rod and it would look like a pink feather duster, which I thought was very charming. There's a few different ways that they can be placed, and I'm surprised that they've not retroactively given this kind of like center column support mechanic to some other things in the game, like, you know, other plants and bits and pieces, because a lot of them require an organic block to support them, while the cacti flowers seemingly don't. And I think that's great. I think it should stay that way. And I'm wondering if maybe that can be extended to other stuff as well. The other things that need supporting blocks that are more specific and have specific properties. So who knows? Maybe we'll see a bit of an overhaul to mechanics like that in future if cactus flowers take off. For now, though, we're going to wrap up that episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening to The Spawn Chunks. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and the Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some enjoyment out of the show, getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community, where pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have our monthly hangout and the quarterly hangout coming up later this month as well. We currently have 294 patrons, which is down 5 from last week. This is also the week Patreon should switch over to subscription billing, so once again, stay tuned for more information about that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us by the usual email address, or if you're a patron already, let us know in the Discord. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons as always. Thank you to Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. The new episodes are available on Mondays on your favorite podcasting platform, and of course on YouTube a short bit later. You can find the email for the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked at thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the rendered distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and play a couple of other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Links to everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. Slated to record a new episode with Steven ESC later this week, probably talking about some of the new Super Bowl trailers and blockbuster movie trailers for things that are coming out later this year. You can find me at Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find, and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am currently rotating between Core Keeper, Satisfactory, and Minecraft every day, from Tuesday through Saturday at 1 o'clock Atlantic. See you there.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside might be infinite, but we're too chicken to find out.